Hey everybody, this is the recap for the week in Washington. I'm going to start out with articles of impeachment. You're probably aware that late in the evening, the Committee on Judiciary was discussing and considering articles of impeachment. There are two, as I understand it, that they're discussing, and they voted them out on Friday morning. That is obstruction of Congress and I think abuse of power. Everybody's got an opinion on this. My opinion is that this is horrifically partisan, as you probably already know, and that the initial charge, which would be abuse of power that's being leveled against the president regarding the conversation he had with President Zelensky, we don't know the half of it because, of course, we only have had witnesses for the prosecution, so to speak. We have had no witnesses for the defense. People see it differently, but I will tell you, in my opinion, anybody that's saying that it has to do with the 2020 election are just making that presumption or assumption. There's nothing in testimony or evidence or otherwise to make that case. The president was interested in looking at what happened in 2016 and Ukraine's involvement, including any involvement with the Bidens. I have no idea whether Joe Biden or his son have done anything, illegal, and I'm not making that claim, but that's clearly where the president was focused. Whether he should be or not is another point of conjecture. I don't think that's impeachable, and I don't think anything has been proven otherwise. The obstruction of Congress, the president is exercising his authority as a separate branch of government to keep certain information and certain conversations, as we call them, privileged. And the reason we do that, whether it's with foreign governments or whether it's within the administration or in the executive branch, there are privileges along the branches, is because, in particular the executive branch, if the president is surrounded by people that are unwilling to talk to him or her about things that are important, for fear that that stuff will become public, whether it's international policy, domestic policy, whether it's international conversations, all that stuff is privileged, and because people would be reluctant to be honest, quite honestly, in the executive branch. Now, the Democrats subpoenaed some of these individuals for testimony. The president said no, and that was the end of it. In the past, anytime that happens, which is quite normal, quite obviously, and happens on a regular basis. If the people that that issue the subpoena feel so strongly about it, they go to the courts to adjudicate, and the courts look at whether the executive privilege being claimed is appropriate or not. But that didn't happen. So essentially, the president is being one of the article of impeachment regarding obstruction of Congress, which, by the way, isn't against there's no law against the obstruction of Congress. There's no law on statute regarding abuse of power. Those are opinions. But in the past, the courts have adjudicated these things. In this case, he's being impeached because he's not, in my opinion, cooperating with his own railroading, which he sees this as a railroading, and he must cooperate in his own railroading. He doesn't want to, so that's obstruction of Congress. I just think this is really bad for the country, and I get that people don't like the president on some occasion. There are people that don't agree with him, don't like him, what have you. That's fine. Those things are expressed at votes in an election. Impeachment is reserved for blatant and obvious crimes against your oath of office. And these are not blatant and they're not obvious. They're just, in my opinion, disagreements over policy and a conversation. But that's where it was. We're expecting next week, since it came out of the House on a partisan or out of the committee on a partisan basis, to some point get to the floor based on the schedule we're hearing from Speaker Pelosi. So that would be before Christmas. But again, I'm just telling you what I'm hearing. You also understand that there's been an agreement made between the House Democrats and the administration on the USMCA, the U.S., Canada, Mexico trade agreement to replace NAFTA. I'm not sure exactly what all the tenets of those changes are. There's one that's very concerning about prescription drugs and generics and patent time running. The president had sought for Mexico and Canada to increase their patent time. Ours is 12 years. Theirs in the past was 5 years. It's my understanding that Speaker Pelosi wanted it reduced from 5 years to 0, which, think about that. So you'll be paying for all the research and development in the United States, and foreign countries, including Canada and Mexico, will be able to go to generic immediately, which stifles then research and development in our country, but also would encourage people to go to Canada or Mexico for their prescription drugs. And so, but that's the deal that I understand has been made. I don't know that for sure, so we're going to take the time that's remaining to take a look at the USMCA. In the past, I've been supportive of it because I think it was a great leap forward from NAFTA, which is really outdated and has encouraged our country, our companies, to move to other countries, including Mexico, and so we needed to update that trade agreement. But we're going to take a look at it and see what happened, what all the tenets of it are. Also, we did the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, H.R. 5038. I voted against that. It essentially provides amnesty for agricultural workers that are present in this country. Doesn't provide amnesty for anybody else, so it just pigeonholes them. And I'm not for amnesty, whether you're an agricultural worker or not. I think that citizenship ought to be valued and ought to mean something, and you shouldn't be rewarded for coming to the country illegally, whether you're working or not. So I voted no, but it did pass. We also passed the National Defense Appropriations Authorizations, which funds our military. If you remember, this moved out of the House of Representatives on a purely partisan vote for the first time in, I think, 7 decades. All Democrats voting for, all Republicans voting against it. Went to the Senate. They stripped, I think, almost all that stuff out of it. So there were some things, some smaller things that were left in it or put in it that I wasn't thrilled about. But we've got to continue to fund our military when we got China, Russia, Iran, North Korea.
You said all the Republicans voted against it?
The first iteration out of the House of Representatives, because it was a completely partisan bill. It came out of the committee bipartisan, as it has done for 70 years.
Right.
They sent it to the Rules Committee, loaded it up with a bunch of stuff that the Democrats wanted, quite honestly, to make it a poison pill, to make it a messaging bill, so that they could say, oh, look, so-and-so voted against the defense of the country. It came to the floor. All the Republicans voted against it. All the Democrats voted for it. They sent it to the Senate. The Senate took most of that stuff out, or almost just about all that stuff out, and then put a conference report together. That's what we just voted on to fund the military. All right, let's talk about H.R. 3 on prescription drugs and the counter proposal, which is H.R. 19. H.R. 3 on prescription drugs is a bill I just voted against. It essentially sets rates for prescription drugs. And what we heard, among other things, if you watch the Florida debate, Representative Ron Wright from Texas was diagnosed 16 months ago with terminal lung cancer, and was given 16 months to live. Yet he spoke on the floor about the effects that this bill would have on the treatment that he's received, which has essentially reduced his cancer to almost 0. That life-saving treatment would not be available under the provisions of this bill. The Congressional Budget Office cited numerous occasions where drugs that are on the verge of, or treatments that are on the verge of being approved would be shelved and never come to market, such as treatments and cures for pancreatic cancer and breast cancer. I agree with most Americans that we are being charged way too much for our drugs, but having the government step in and set the prices and stop all research and development doesn't seem to be the correct answer either. And just keep in mind, every year we give more to the National Institutes of Health and the Center for Disease Control, more of your tax dollars to research this stuff. But this bill actually goes counter to that. Sure, we want to reduce drug prices, but not by having the federal government just say this is the price, and then the drug company either sells it at that price or doesn't make any money, or they just don't sell it. If you're not going to make any money, you're not going to sell the drug. So you're going to hear a lot about that, but I just encourage you to take a little deeper look on that. We also are looking at the deadline for the continuing resolution. That's funding of the federal government that comes up on the 20th. As far as I know, Negotiations continue, but I don't know if there's going to be a shutdown or not before Christmas. I suspect not, but I don't know. I'm not involved in the negotiations, so I don't know where they stand. I just know that we're on a CR, a continuing resolution now. It expires on the 20th, and we'll go back in next week and take a look, and hopefully they'll come to some agreement on spending for the federal government. Two final things. The Horowitz Report is out. I've spent a fair amount of time looking at it, a few hundred pages. I think the executive summary, double-sided, is about 30 pages, 35 pages or something like that. I would encourage everybody at least to read the executive summary. This is about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or the FISA Act, or the FISA courts. This is where we surveil terrorists to see what they're up to, and that's what's approved. Understand, when somebody goes to get a FISA warrant, when you go to get a search warrant let me back up, in any other court in the United States, the prosecution presents their reason why there should be a search warrant, but the judge will also hear from the defense. In the FISA court, there is no defense. It's only the prosecution. The reason it's that way is A, because it's so important, and B, because these are suspected terrorists. Unfortunately, I have voted against the FISA court reauthorization in the past because I was concerned about the way it was going and the potential abuses of power. This report outlines the abuses that occurred during the last few years regarding the 2016 presidential election, the spying of people associated with the Donald J. Trump campaign, and then his presidency thereafter. And so I'm very concerned about it. I would just encourage you to read it. The FBI really mishandled things. They say the Inspector General said that he did not find evidence of bias. I'm not sure what the motive was other than bias, but he didn't find it. Understand, the Inspector General is limited to the people that he can have testify. He's limited to people working within the government. And many of the people that are accused of doing things incorrectly, with malice or not, in this FISA investigation, have left the government. I'm talking about the former FBI director, Mr. Comey, talking about Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, those folks. So without the access to them and their unbridled testimony, the FISA report from the Inspector General is limited. And as you probably know, Attorney General Barr and the other special investigator that are looking into FISA and other things associated with the 2016 election have disagreed with components of Inspector General Horowitz's report, including the bias issue. So the saga continues in that regard. And finally, I will be introducing a PTSD bill for veterans, specifically to get the Veterans Administration to offer stellate ganglion block therapy to veterans diagnosed with PTSD. More to follow on that. We just feel like we can do more with our veterans, or for our veterans that have PTSD, and there's a treatment available, generally speaking, but not all VA clinics offer it, and we just want to make sure that that's something that's available to veterans no matter where they live. So that's the recap for last week, and this week we're looking at two very big things: impeachment, potentially the USMCA if they schedule the vote on that, and the continuing resolution for continued federal funding. So with that, I hope your holidays are great, and I just wish you all the best. God bless you.